session, which is focused on trauma-informed care. I'm already distracted, sorry. There we go. So welcome to today's session. My name's Kirby. I'm one of the directors at Thrive Aged Care Consultants. Kate Lamont is the other co-director waving away in the corner. Hopefully you can see her. And Kate will be letting everybody in today. And oh, thanks, Janice. And we'll be monitoring the chat. So if this is the first time that you have been to one of our sessions, welcome. We run these on a monthly basis and we do record them and upload them onto our YouTube channel so that you can refer back to them, or you can feel free to share these with your teams. We have a number of recordings on there that we are more than happy for you to share and use rather than reinventing the wheel. So go ahead and make sure you check out our channel later. We'll give you the link at the end of the presentation. But if you haven't been before, welcome. Like I was saying, my name is Kathy and I'm a nurse by background, and Kate is an OT, and we are Thrive Aged Care Consultants. We've been around for about 2.5 years, and we work with health and aged care providers to support organisations through education, training and mentoring on lots of different topics, and in particular around the strengthened aged care standards. We're both very passionate clinicians and we've been in the industry for over 20 years each. So we've been around a while and we love working with you guys and running these types of sessions so that we can really give you some additional knowledge to help you feel a bit more confident and competent in what is a very dynamic industry where lots of change is happening. And I'm sure all of you guys are very happy or taking a big deep breath out, knowing that the aged care standards have been delayed until November 1. I'm already seeing a few people. It does give us a little bit of extra time, doesn't it? It will go quickly, but it's a great opportunity to look at what we have in place, and in particular, today's topic, trauma-informed care. So just some housekeeping. Like I was saying, please keep yourself on mute because it does get quite noisy when there's a number of people who are jumping in. This session is recorded, so it will be uploaded onto YouTube this afternoon and the link shared with you. Please use the chat function. Kate will be monitoring that for any questions, and we'll have some time at the end of today's session for questions, but just keep them to the end because half an hour does go quite quickly as well. So today's session, we are talking about trauma-aware and healing-informed care, and we're going to have a look at where it fits into the new strengthened standards and why it's such an important topic and why it has been included in these standards. We're going to talk about some facts relating to trauma, and then we're going to talk about what trauma-aware and healing-informed care looks like and where you might want to start when you're thinking about your organisation or thinking about your team who you may work with, and what trauma-aware, healing-informed care might look like for you, for your staff, for your clients or residents. So before we get started, I would really like to hear from you. So if you could pop into the chat, who here has or is currently experiencing trauma? And if you could just pop a yes in the chat, that would be great. Okay, I've had one response. 2, 3, 4, 5. So I think we're up to about 7 or 8 people who have, I don't know, oh, we're still going. Okay, so there's a number of people in here. Now there's about 36, 37 people in this session currently. So that's about a third of us. And that's a bit interesting, isn't it? Because there's quite a few responses. About a third of the participants have responded to that question. But maybe some of you who didn't respond have experienced trauma, but you didn't feel comfortable answering that question in a public forum. Or maybe you haven't experienced trauma. Yeah, and we've got our first no there. Yeah. So maybe some of you haven't experienced what you would consider a trauma, or maybe it is that you don't want a bunch of strangers knowing, including me, about your trauma. Or maybe you're very happy, like the people who responded yes, to have that discussion to a certain point. Maybe yes is the limit of that discussion that you're willing to have, or maybe you might be quite open to having a broader conversation with me about what that trauma experience was for you. Now, some of you know me, maybe because you've worked with me previously, you've met me in person, excuse me, or maybe you've seen me in education sessions online, but a lot of you don't, and there's a lot of unfamiliar faces here. So we don't really have a relationship or a connection, do we? Yeah. So why would you want to tell me your whole life story? And like I was saying, maybe some of you might be comfortable to do so and really delve into telling me about your experience. But quite commonly, a lot of people are not going to openly say, "Hey, Kathy, nice to meet you. Yes, I'm really glad that you asked," and start telling me all of your details about the experience that you may have had. So this is a question that we really need to think about, don't we? When we're thinking about trauma aware and healing informed care, how do we even start with that process and what does that look like? Because is it something that we just want to blurt out bluntly in our admission paperwork? You know, is it a question that we're going to add into our initial paperwork when we meet with a person for the first time? Have you experienced trauma in your life? Or is that just something that's becoming a bit of a ticker box? And is that the right approach to take? Or should we be looking about how we can gather that information in a different way? So it possibly isn't the right direction to take. So how can we look at getting and gathering that information and building that connection and rapport with our residents or our clients initially so that we're able to identify that information at the right point? So thank you to everybody who responded. Before we get further into today's session, let's just go back and like we always do, we link it back to the standards and explain where it's actually mentioned in the standards, but we're not going to go into that in detail because we're all here we're going to go well beyond meeting the standards. We're all going to aim to exceed them. But just to link it back to where it is actually mentioned, it's mentioned in 3 parts of the strength and aged care standards. Now, standard 1, the person, is where is the most important standard, you may say, which is all about understanding the person who we're providing care for. And the key statement in standard 1 is that aged care workers are required to provide trauma-aware and healing-informed care using evidence-based practice. And this should include, and the list below there I'll leave for you to read, but highlighted in bold are the key points that are required for your workforce to be able to understand. And some of these points are not going to be new. It's something that we should, and when you actually break it down, not really that scary. When you're thinking about a new concept of trauma-informed care, what does that actually mean? When you break it down and you look at this is stuff that we should know, isn't it? When we're providing care for a person where we're looking after them, you know, providing personal care, providing daily care, supporting them to live their best life, then we really should understand their life experience. We should be providing individualized care that meets their needs. But we do need to be aware of that person's history and experiences that may contribute to the way that they respond or react when we are providing that support and care. So that includes understanding whether they may have experienced a trauma, whether they disclose that or not, and what that might present like, and what are the different types of trauma that people may have experienced, because trauma is different for everybody. Yeah. So what somebody feels, let me rephrase. What somebody expresses as being a traumatic event may not be what you yourself might consider a traumatic event. And that is where the awareness comes into play. So it's being aware of what events a person may have experienced, but also how that affects that person, because it may be different to the way you would respond or to how other people may have responded as well. So it's all about that awareness, okay? The other areas of the strength and standards where trauma aware and healing informed care is covered is in standard 2, which is the organisation, and standard 3, which is care and services. Now, standard 2 is really around that training and competency-based training. And the key words here are all aged care workers. So all aged care workers, like we mentioned last session where we spoke about the dementia training framework, it's not just about your clinical team. It's about anyone who is working in that environment with the older person who you are providing care for. And this is specifically saying that you must have competency-based training. And that is in relation to trauma-aware and healing-informed care, delivery of that care that is person-centered and culturally and rights-based. Okay, so what does that look like? And we'll have a talk about that a bit later today. And standard 3 as well, which really reinforces that the person who is receiving the care is receiving that trauma-aware and healing-informed care from the people who you are employing or your team members. Okay. So trauma-aware and healing-informed care is a term that I guess you raise your hands or pop it in the chat. Who finds it confusing and who finds it confronting and who finds it thinking, I actually don't understand what that means? Because I think that there's a lot of confusion out there, and in a lot of aspects it's a complicated area, but I think, perfectly said. Thank you, Janice. It feels too big. Yeah, it's a concept that it's really hard to articulate, and it's very hard to articulate when you don't understand what it actually means. And if we think way back to like 2019, when these standards came in and person-centered care became this new hot concept, it took us a long time to get our head around what person-centered care actually means. Yeah, so trauma-aware and healing-informed care can be hard for people to articulate, but it's really going back to the start and thinking about what does this look like for the person. And when we're looking at trauma-aware and healing-informed care, we want to have a look at 2 key words that are included in this statement, because I think this is where it becomes quite overwhelming and it seems quite big, and we make things more complicated potentially than what we need to. And those two words are aware and informed. Okay, so nowhere in the standards does it say that we now all of a sudden need to become trauma experts. So let's be clear, and I can see a few people smiling, because I think that's sometimes what we tell ourselves. Oh my God, now what else do we need to do when we're supporting older people? We now need to become psychologists or counselors or, mental health clinicians, and that is not the case. What it is saying is that we need to be aware and we need to be informed in our approach. And if we look at the definitions of what aware means, it is having the knowledge or perception of a situation or a fact. And when we're looking at informed, it is having or showing knowledge of a subject or a situation. So it's not saying go out and undertake all of this additional skill, complex training to become a psychologist and deliver that service at your organisation. It's saying that you need to have an awareness, so having knowledge of what trauma might be, what trauma might look like, how it might present for different people, and have an understanding of what our approach should be when we are providing care or support for an older person who may have experienced trauma, and that our approach should be informed. So we should have an awareness of different types of traumas, of different types of impacts, and how that could present for different people. And then what should our approach be for that person? So what kind of things should we do to show that we have an awareness that people may have had a life experience that is going to impact on the way we are able to deliver care to them so that they feel safe and supported? Okay, so we need to have processes in place when we do identify that somebody may be experiencing or may have experienced a trauma or may be displaying symptoms that require some additional support. Yes, we do. We need to have those processes in place. We should have them in place anyway, shouldn't we? Because, and I'm bringing myself back on track, but having a look at mental health statistics. How many people are impacted by mental health generally, and how do we access those services? So these are things that we need to have in place generally anyway. Okay, so when we're talking about trauma-aware healing informed care, it's about making sure that all of our aged care workers have that understanding and have that confidence, and then that you have processes in place to refer on to services to support your residents who may need that additional support. Okay. So when we have a look at some statistics, what percentage of Australian adults do you think have experienced a traumatic event? And just pop your answers in the chat. 90% we've got. Yep, so we've got a mix between 50 and 90% here, and you're pretty much smack bang in the middle. Yep. So it's estimated, and this is back in 2022, that there are about 75% of Australian adults who've experienced at least one traumatic event in their lifetime. Okay, so that's a large percentage, isn't it? That's 3/4 of the people who are in this room, or 3/4 of the people who we're providing care for. So if you think about that and you think about your population of residents or clients, how many would that equate to? And when you see stats like that, it starts to make sense why it would be such a focus on how we are going to be providing safe and supportive care for our residents or our clients moving forward. Yeah. Now, when we have a look at different groups who are at increased risk of experiencing trauma, they're listed here, and this is based on evidence. Okay, so people who've experienced homelessness, refugees, people who've experienced family violence, LGBTQI community, emergency service workers, armed forces, veterans, and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander groups. These are people who are at increased risk of experiencing trauma. So again, if you start thinking about the population of residents or clients who you support, are there any of these groups who jump out at you, who you think, oh, some of my residents, a number of my residents or a group of my residents would fit into this particular category? Because this is somewhere that you might want to start when you are looking at trauma-informed care, and it seems like such a big concept. Let's break it down and let's have a look at where are we going to focus and where are we going to start, and where might we look at getting some more information and arming ourselves with knowledge. Okay, so having a look at those groups as a starting point could be something for you to look at. So when we go back and have a look at what trauma-aware and healing-informed care, what does it mean and what does it look like? The first two lines here summarize it really nicely. And it's recognizing that older people may have experienced trauma and that this may impact on the way they respond in certain situations. How simple is that? 2 lines. That's what the message that we want to get across as a starting point with our teams. Okay. Yes, people may have experienced trauma and it may impact on how they respond in certain situations. Yeah. And on top of that, if you care for specialist populations or you provide support in particular to people living with dementia, and we know that in residential care in particular, about 68% of people are living with moderate to advanced dementia. So a lot of you who are here today, and I know some of you are from community, and we know the rates of people living with dementia in the community are high as well. But people living with dementia may find it more difficult to cope with trauma than others. So if this is a group, again, that you are providing supports for, or have specialist units, this is something that you also want to consider. And there's a lot of reasons why people living with dementia find it more difficult to cope. That we're not going to go into that today, but again, another group that you want to pay attention to and have a think about. What kind of training do I need to do? What might trauma present like? What might our staff experience when they're providing care for a person living with dementia who may have experienced trauma as well? Yeah. So, trauma aware and healing informed care is ensuring that the person feels supported and safe, and that we are delivering care in a way that respects the person's choices, preferences, and recognizes those life experiences. Yeah. So, it's really important that we go back to that. And when we're looking at our training and when we're looking at our processes that we put in place, it comes back to the why, because without the why, we can't get to the how. Okay. So when we're thinking about the why, who do you think, sorry, before we get to the why, so when we're going to talk to people about what trauma may look like, what trauma-informed care may be, who in our teams do you think needs to be trauma aware? Who do you think in your teams needs to have an understanding of what this might look like for your population of residents or clients who you're providing care for? Everyone, yep. Oh, great. Everyone's on the same page. And by everyone, just to clarify, and all staff, I'm loving it. Just to clarify, are we talking about all of your clinical staff and PCWs, or are we talking about your kitchen staff, your allied health, your volunteers, your cleaning staff? Because when I say all staff, I'm meaning all staff. And remembering back to the standards, it's referring to all aged care workers. So that includes everybody, okay? And it's really important that we do include everybody. Everyone who has interactions, amazing. That is exactly my point. How many interactions do our non-clinical team members have with our residents and clients each day? Even when I worked in the acute setting, my cleaning staff knew a lot more about my patients sometimes than the nursing staff did, because they were that consistent service. They were in the same rooms, they were allocated the same location to work in. They worked the same shifts. They saw the same people. So we cannot forget the importance of educating everybody in our teams about what trauma aware and what that might look like, and why we need to adapt our approach potentially to be healing informed. Okay. Because without the why, we won't get to the how. So if our teams don't have an understanding of why people might be responding in a particular way, if people don't understand what different different types of trauma or different situations that could lead to having experienced trauma. Sorry, I didn't articulate that very well. Different types of experiences that may lead to a trauma response is what I was trying to say. Yeah. We need to be aware. We need to ensure that our team are aware of that why, so that they are more likely and definitely going to take that healing approach to care. Okay. Healing informed. Because if we don't involve the whole team, then people are not going to have that understanding, and we don't want people unintentionally doing the wrong thing and trying to be really supportive and caring for that older person, when in fact it might be something that is a trigger for them, because they don't have that background or they don't have that knowledge of what a traumatic experience might look like for the person and how that might present, and how we can why we need to really respect that individual person's needs. Yeah. So what does that mean to you, or what does it look like? And there are a few things that you want to consider. So when you're looking at trauma-informed care in your organisation for your team, let's get back to the start. And this is what I would do if I was in your position, if I was a manager, if I was an educator. I would start with, what do we currently have in place? Do we have any training or education programs that are in place? And that might be no, and that's fine, because we're all starting from a blank slate. So then what I would be doing is having a look at things like those groups. Think about your region, your area that you work in, those core groups who are at higher risk of experiencing a trauma, and start developing a training plan around that. Think about who works within your teams, and what do each of these groups need to understand about trauma-aware and healing-informed care. And like I spoke about last session, using that dementia training framework, I would be doing a tiered approach. So not everybody is going to need the same level of information, same level of understanding, but there needs to be a baseline that everybody is across. And that's what I would be starting with, developing that tiered approach of who needs to know what and what are we going to focus on first, because you cannot do everything at once. Okay. Have a think about, before you're doing this training as well, who are the specialized supports in your region? So if someone does identify that somebody needs some additional mental health support, what do you have available to you? And then putting that together and including that in your training so that you're giving people the knowledge and the skills and the how. So when you identify that somebody needs additional assistance, this is where I want you to go. Okay, this is the services that are available to you. And then looking at your processes as well to deliver this care and identifying gaps. Do you have, how are you identifying, how are you providing trauma-informed care? What's the expectations of staff? Yep. Where do they access that follow-up? How are you embedding that? What does that look like in practice? Okay, so these are all the things right back to the beginning, and possibly there are things that haven't been developed as yet, and that's fine, because reach out to your colleagues, reach out to other organisations, reach out to other residential aged cares within your organisation as well, because a lot of you are from big organisations. Have that conversation. What does it look like? What can we do together? Don't reinvent the wheel. Share those resources around. Now, just quickly, I wanted to share a framework that I found from Passivant Memorial Home in USA, and they take the approach of the 4 R's of trauma-informed care, which I thought was quite simple and quite nice. And that is realize, recognize, respond, and resist re-traumatization, which is what we're ultimately trying to do. We don't want people coming into our care and then being triggered by the way we approach or the way we do things that re-trigger an experience that they've had in their past. Okay. So when we think about what does this look like in practice, it's that realization, and we need to start there. So it all starts right back at the beginning. So realizing that people may have experienced trauma, and it might not be the ones that we can easily relate to. So we can easily relate or understand that people, who've been in and experienced abuse, or are veterans or were refugees. Okay, there are other events that can be that could be traumatic for people, and we need to have that awareness. And that's where we need to start, with realizing what is a trauma for myself may not be a trauma for somebody else, but that doesn't mean that that's not a real experience for the person. And that we need to understand that although about 75% of people have experienced trauma, and you guys were very open in saying yes to that question, not everyone is going to openly report it. So we need to have that awareness. And with that knowledge, we can look at situations and we can look at responses, and we can link life history and life story and what we're observing or assessing at that time, and try and put 2 to 2 together and take that healing informed approach when we're providing that care. It's important to recognize as well, so making sure that we are capturing the knowledge of the person's individual needs, preferences, and life stories, and really following them. Because sometimes we're great at doing all of this paperwork and asking people, but we're not always great at following that. And we need to, again, link that back to the why. Why is that routine important for that person? Why is that preference important for that person? Yeah. The remembering as well that trauma removes a person's sense of safety and control, and may impact on how they respond in certain situations. And we need to be aware of people's life story and background as well. And that's not just the great leisure and rec team who collect all of that life story information and doesn't always get shared with the broader team. That's really important information that we need to be across. So looking at that as a starting point as well. Where do we share that information? Where does it go? And going back to the why. Why is it so important to that person? Responding as well. So ensuring that we capture that information and share it, like I was just saying. Educate all of our team. So not just the clinical team, our non-clinical team as well, about what trauma is and those common signs and symptoms and responses that you may be seen, and having those processes in place to take action when someone exhibits a sign or you suspect that a person may have experienced trauma. And resist re-traumatization, which is the key, okay? Because we want to minimize the chance of us triggering a response. And the only way that we can minimize it to the best of our ability is by having that knowledge and by having those systems in place. And a lot of that is by having that awareness and going right back to the beginning and providing people with education about what it is and what it might look like. So again, just looking at where you would focus your training. So going back to the realize and recognize, if this was me, I would be starting here. I would be thinking about where I'm providing supports. Where is my location of my residents or my clients if I'm working in that region? And then look about what's been happening. Yeah. What groups of residents might have experienced any of these risk factors? Are you in a regional area that's been disaster affected? Yeah. Bushfires, floods, loss of big industry. Yeah. These are all things that can be traumatic for the entire community. Okay. So think about your population and what is relevant to you and start your focus there. And then there are other key areas which I would be looking, and there's lots of different resources on the stolen generation and the forgotten Australians as well, because there is a lack of knowledge around about what that looked like and what that actually means. So this is where I would be starting my training and education for my team. I'm 1 minute over and I'm wrapping up. So again, so we covered this earlier, but final thoughts of those workforce considerations: do not leave out your non-clinical team members. Okay, because they have a lot of interactions, and commonly, where are those interactions happening? Oftentimes in the person's personal space, or potentially, what is it that person is observing when they're trying to be helpful and getting a person, trying to coax a resident to come out and eat in the main dining room when that's actually a trigger for them. Yeah, because of their experience that they had in a childhood growing up. So really think about those workforce considerations. Don't just focus on your clinical team members. So in summary, a trauma experience is different for everybody. Okay, it's not necessarily something that you can ask a direct question and get a direct answer to. You might get it, you might not. Okay, but we need to be aware that about 75% of us have experienced a traumatic event in our lifetime. And so we need to ensure that we are aware of what trauma looks like and how it might present, and then how our approach is really important to make a person feel safe and supported in their home, which is either residential care or home care. Teaching people the why behind trauma-aware and healing-informed care, and provide them with the supports and to know who to go to if they have concerns. And keep it simple. Yep. So don't try and take on this huge concept. Like you guys said, it can be overwhelming. Really just break it down and start with, who are my populations, key populations? What have we got in place and where do we want to start? Okay. So keep it really simple. And knowledge is power. With knowledge becomes skill, and with skill and knowledge comes confidence and competence to deliver that care. Okay. Okay, now I'm 4 minutes over, sorry guys, but we will turn the recording off in a minute, and if you have any questions, happy to stay on. Thank you very much for coming along to today's session. If you want to know more about trauma-aware and healing-informed care, we do have 2 upcoming masterclasses. We will, this first week of July. We'll send you some links to those after today with the link to the recording, and please feel free to share that with your team. As always, we love feedback. So if you could take less than a minute to provide us some feedback about today's session and provide us some topics that you would like for the coming months. We run these every month, and we do it based on hot topics and based on interest within from you guys. So thank you very much again for coming along, and I will just stop the recording and